According to the most recent BLS CPI report, grocery prices at the Food at Home Index are up 2.7% year over year, and right now the cheapest shelves in the store are the ones doing the most invisible editing. 5 common store brand pantry categories are quietly swapping real ingredients for cheaper substitutes, while 5 others still pass the label test. Walk the canned, bottled, and boxed aisles today, and you will see what I am seeing. Ingredient lists getting longer, oils being shuffled around, sweeteners creeping upward, can liners changing, and natural flavors doing the work that real words used to do. The pattern is not an empty shelf. It is a quiet recipe rewrite, hiding in the small type on the back of the package. Different categories fail in different ways, and the 10 on this list are the ones worth checking before the next grocery trip. Number 10. Applesauce, pectin and sweetener swap. The store brand applesauce jar has looked the same for years, but the recipe quietly changed. Look at the ingredient list on a current jar, and the sweetener position has shifted. Cheaper sweetener blends, looser pectin ratios, and a softer set inside the same iconic package. The label still says applesauce. The jar still weighs the same. The behavior in the kitchen has been quietly trimmed to cut input cost. For a household that uses applesauce as a baking fat replacer, a sweetener for oatmeal, or a kid side, the change matters more than the price tag suggests. The set is softer, so a baked good that depended on the old structure slumps in the pan. The sweetness is lighter, so a recipe that worked last year needs more. The morning oatmeal that used to taste balanced now tastes flat, unless the cook adds something else. Most shoppers will not notice until a recipe that depended on the old texture quietly fails. That is the corner being cut. Not an empty jar, but a recipe that suddenly does not work in a kitchen that did not change. If a household bakes with applesauce, look for a single sweetener word on the label, sugar or cane sugar, and a pectin mention that lists actual fruit pectin. If those are buried, the recipe has been quietly trimmed. Number 9. Peanut butter, the oil stability tell. Store-brand creamy peanut butter has been a pantry workhorse for years, and many households buy it by the twin pack. But a closer look at the ingredient list shows a quiet drift toward mono and diglycerides and less stable oils in some batches. That is the kind of change that doesn't jump out until the jar sits on the shelf for a month, and the oil separation looks different than it used to. The label still says peanut butter. The grind is still fine. The flavor is still close, but the stability underneath is not the same. For a household that uses peanut butter for sandwiches, cookies, satay-style sauces, or straight off the spoon, the change is mostly invisible at first. For a household that stocks it for long pantry life, it is a quiet signal. Oils that separate faster mean the jar moves through its good window faster. The household is not necessarily losing nutrition. It is losing shelf confidence in a jar that used to be a confident buy. The spoonful that used to hold together now weeps oil across the bread. The cookie that used to bake chewy now spreads too thin because the oil ratio has shifted underneath the recipe. Check the label for fully hydrogenated oils or mono and diglycerides near the top of the ingredient list. If those are showing up, the recipe has shifted toward cheaper stabilizers. Move toward a peanut butter with 1 or 2 ingredients, peanuts and salt, and rotate the jars faster. The boring jar is no longer the boring jar it once was, and the kitchen counter can tell. Number 8. Pasta sauce, tomato paste boost. Store-brand traditional pasta sauce has stayed cheap for a reason. Recent label versions show a higher tomato paste content and less whole tomato body, with added starches and modified food starch used to rebuild the texture that whole tomatoes used to give the sauce for free. The jar still says pasta sauce. The serving size on the label has not changed. Inside, the sauce has been quietly redesigned around cheaper inputs. For a household that pours sauce over noodles once a week, the difference is small. For a household that cooks the sauce into chili, into a baked ziti, or into a slow cooker meal with canned tomatoes and Italian seasoning, the change is real. The starch boost means the sauce thickens faster, which sounds convenient until the chili thickens past the point it should, or the baked ziti dries out in the oven. The cheaper paste version also carries a milder tomato flavor, so the same recipe tastes duller and needs more seasoning to land. The weeknight pasta that used to taste like a slow-cooked Sunday sauce now tastes like a quick pour. If the household depends on a strong tomato base for cooking, Pick a name brand that uses whole or diced tomatoes near the top of the ingredient list. The store brand jar is fine for a quick weeknight pour. It is no longer the workhorse it was. Check the ingredient order. If tomato paste appears before tomatoes, the cheap version is already winning the recipe, and the kitchen will start to wonder why the same old chili tastes duller than it used to. Number 7. Canned vegetables. Sodium up, can liner switch. Store brand canned vegetables, corn, green beans, peas, carrots, have always been pantry basics, and the recent label shifts are the kind of thing nobody notices until they read carefully. Sodium has crept up in the no salt added and lower sodium versions to balance cheaper processing, and some can liners have shifted to non-BPA alternatives that occasionally affect flavor subtly during long storage. The cans still say corn or green beans. The cans still look the same on the shelf. The recipe quietly carries more salt and a slightly different background note. For a household that watches sodium for blood pressure reasons, the change matters. The no salt added label used to mean exactly that. Now it can mean a small amount added in processing to keep costs down. For a household that stocks these cans for long-term emergency use, the liner question matters. Long-term storage of canned vegetables depends on stable liners. If the liner has shifted, the older can may carry a faint metallic note that did not exist in the version the household bought 2 years ago. Read the label. Pick the no salt added version and rinse the vegetables before serving. For long-term storage, rotate the cans every year or two instead of treating them as indefinite. The store brand line is fine for everyday sides. It is no longer the boring long-term can it used to be, and the difference lands on the kitchen counter whenever the lid is opened. Number 6. Broth and bouillon. Salt carriers in disguise. Store-brand broth cartons and bouillon cubes are the unsung flavor lever in most pantries, and they are also one of the easiest categories to quietly reformulate. Current label versions show salt content rising in both liquid broth and cube form, with hydrolyzed yeast extract and natural flavors quietly doing the work that real chicken or beef used to do. The carton still says chicken broth. The cubes still say beef bouillon. The flavor has shifted toward a saltier, less meaty baseline. For a household that uses broth as a cooking base, soups, rice, slow cooker meals, sauce deglazes, the change matters more than the price suggests. A broth with too much salt pushes every recipe toward oversalted territory unless the cook compensates. A bouillon cube with less real meat and more yeast extract carries a flatter umami note, so the rice that used to taste like a side dish now tastes like salted water. The kitchen adjusts by adding more, and the salt intake climbs without anyone noticing. Check the label for natural flavors or yeast extract sitting high in the ingredient list. If those are above the actual meat or vegetable component, the cube or carton is doing less than the front label promises. For long pantry planning, rotate broth cartons by date and treat cubes as a flavor rescue, not a daily driver. Now the other side of the list, the 5 categories that still pass the test. Number 5. Single ingredient cooking oil, still real. Not every store brand oil is a quiet swap. The ones that still pass the test are the bottles that name exactly what they are: canola oil, olive oil, peanut oil, or avocado oil, with no and/or blend hiding behind the front label. The bottle may be plain, the label may be boring, but when the ingredient list names one oil and stops there, the kitchen knows what it is buying. For a household that fries, sautés, bakes, or stocks fat for emergency meals, that clarity matters. Oil is not just a cooking helper. It is the difference between rice that feels like punishment and rice that can become a real skillet meal. A pantry can have beans, flour, canned vegetables, and sauce, and still feel flat if the fat layer is unreliable. The pass category here is not the cheapest mystery blend. It is the store brand bottle that tells the truth in one line. Read the back, not the front. If the label says one oil and the best by date gives you enough time to rotate it, the store brand still earns a place in the pantry. Buy what your household actually cooks with, keep it away from heat and light, and rotate it before the flavor turns. That is the difference between a cheap bottle and a useful one. Number 4. Canned black beans, still real. Not every store brand canned product has been quietly redone. Store brand canned black beans have stayed close to the traditional recipe: black beans, water, salt, and minimal additives. The can is the same size. The texture after rinsing is right. The price beats most name brands by a meaningful margin per can. This is the boring canned bean that still does what a pantry black bean is supposed to do. For a household that cooks rice and beans, chili, burrito bowls, or a quick soup base, the store brand black bean is still a confident buy. It does not pretend to be a name brand. It just does its job, and the price is still the bargain that made shoppers grab it in the first place. No corner cutting visible on the label. No recipe redesign behind the can. The chili that uses 2 cans still hits the way it used to. Number 3. Long grain white rice. Still real. Store brand long grain white rice has stayed one of the cleanest pantry staples in the entire store. The bag still says long grain enriched rice. The ingredient list is 1 line long. The cook is predictable. The price per pound is the bargain shoppers remember. This is the boring pantry bag that has not been quietly redesigned around cheaper blends. For a household that stocks rice as a calorie base, the store brand bag is still the boring right answer. Stored dry and sealed, it holds for years. It cooks the same every time. No surprise swaps, no hidden starches, no second ingredient showing up under a vague word. The label has not changed in years, and that is the boring reliability a pantry actually needs. The pot that used to come out right still comes out right. Number 2. All-purpose flour. Still real. Store brand all-purpose flour has stayed the workhorse boring bag of the pantry aisle. The ingredient list is 1 word. Enriched bleached flour. The protein content is consistent. The bag has not been redrafted around cheaper wheat blends. The price still beats most name brands on a per-pound basis. This is the bag that earns the top still real position because it does something most substitutes cannot. It holds a baked structure predictably, batch after batch. For a household that bakes, breads, pancakes, biscuits, or roux-based dishes, the store-brand flour is still a confident buy. The kitchen can rely on it. The label is clean. The price is right. Out of everything on this list, this is the bag that has not been quietly rebuilt around cheaper inputs. The bread that needs a strong flour still rises the way it should. The biscuit that needs a predictable protein level still fluffs the way it should. The roux that needs a stable starch still thickens the way it should. Number 1. Whole kernel corn, still real. Store brand whole kernel corn has stayed close to the original recipe, with corn, water, and a touch of salt on the ingredient list, and a price that still beats most name brands by a wide margin per can. This is the can that earns the top still real position because it does 3 things at once. It works as a side, it works as a casserole base, and it works as a filler that turns a half can of beans into a real meal. The kernels are firm. The brine is clean. The label has not been redrafted around cheaper inputs. For a household that uses canned corn in casseroles, soups, skillet dinners, or as a side, the store brand can still belongs in the pantry. The price-to-quality ratio has held, and the recipe has not been quietly swapped. The casserole that depends on a can of corn still tastes right. The skillet dinner that depends on a drained can still works. The boring can still earns its shelf space, and that is the win most shoppers never think to look for, because the boring can is the one that quietly held its line while the rest of the aisle got edited. So here is the bigger picture. Grocery inflation at 2.7% year over year, and counting means the cheapest brands are working harder than ever to hold their price, and that pressure lands on ingredient lists, can liners, sweetener orders, and oil blends before it lands on the shelf tag. 5 categories on this list have been quietly cut. 5 have not. The boring jars, cans, and bags that still do what the label says are doing exactly what a sensible pantry needs them to do. This week, double-check the applesauce, peanut butter, pasta sauce, canned vegetables, and broth already in the pantry. If any of them carry natural flavors high on the label, if tomato paste sits above tomatoes, if yeast extract replaces the actual meat, or if the ingredient list has grown longer than it used to be, the recipe has changed even if the brand name has not. The front label still says the same product. The back label tells the truth. Move trusted baking and long-term cooking jobs to versions with shorter, more honest ingredient lists, while keeping the brands that have earned the trust. This month, take 10 minutes to read the labels on the pantry cans and bottles already on the shelf. If mono and diglycerides appears near the top of the peanut butter, if modified food starch is doing the work that whole tomatoes used to do in the sauce, if Hydrolyzed yeast extract has crept above the meat word in the broth. The recipe has been edited under the same brand name. The kitchen knows the difference before the shopper does. Keep single-ingredient oil, corn, black beans, rice, and flour on the shelf. Those 5 have earned their spot, and quietly replace the ones that no longer do. The smartest pantry is not the one with the cheapest jar. It is the one where the boring, affordable brands actually do what the label says they do, and the ones that no longer do get quietly replaced before the next recipe depends on them. Which boring brand have you noticed quietly changing under the same label? One more practical check matters before you trust any bargain brand again. Compare the old package in your pantry to the new one on the shelf. Not the front label, not the bright price tag, the ingredient list, the net weight, the serving count, and the order of the ingredients. A corner cut usually announces itself in small type before it shows up in dinner. If the same jar suddenly needs more seasoning, if the same sauce burns faster, if the same canned vegetable tastes saltier, do not argue with the kitchen. The kitchen is telling you the label changed before the shopper noticed. That does not mean every store-brand pantry item is bad. It means the old rule, the store brand is always the same, just cheaper, no longer works. Some store-brand staples are still honest. Flour, rice, black beans, and corn still do their job. Others have moved from reliable pantry staples into price-holder products, where the manufacturer protects the shelf tag by shaving the recipe. That is not panic. That is grocery math. The calm move is simple. Keep buying the store brands that are still real. Stop giving automatic trust to the ones that changed. For baking, buy consistency before price. For long storage, buy short ingredient lists before bright labels. For everyday meals, test 1 can or jar before filling the pantry with 12. The cheapest pantry is not the pantry that buys the lowest sticker price. It is the pantry that does not have to replace failed food twice. And if you want the fastest aisle test, look for the ingredient that moved upward. Sugar moving above fruit, whey moving above cheese, tomato paste moving above tomatoes, yeast extract moving above meat, stabilizers moving closer to the top. That single movement tells you more than any sale tag ever will. The front label sells trust. The back label tells the truth. Check it once now while the shelf is calm, and the next pantry mistake costs a few minutes instead of a full recipe. That is the quiet win.